Good evening. The Frontrunners New York LGBT Pride Run Pride Week panel in partnership with New York Roadrunners. My name is David Ernst, and I am the 20 Pride Run race director. This Saturday will be the 41st running of the LGBT Pride. We're expecting a great crowd to be running in Central Park and helping to promote LGBTQ visibility and joy. The Pride Week panel is a really exciting part of the Pride Run programming, where we get to bring together runners and people in the LGBTQ community to discuss a topic of interest. I'm very excited to welcome our panel, along with the head of diversity, equity, inclusion, and internal communications, Jenna Panton at New York Roadrunners, who will be serving as the moderator for our panel tonight. To Jenna, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, David. If you have just joined us, I am Jenna, pronouns she, her. We will be discussing every one of the panelists here, their lived experience with the impact and benefits that running and the running community can have on the LGBTQIA+ runners' mental health. If you do have questions along the way, feel free to add them to the chat throughout the session. You will have an opportunity at the end to ask these questions, and we will answer them before we wrap up. As an LGBTQIA+ ally, I am so incredibly excited to be surrounded by our amazing panel today, and I have the pleasure of introducing them. So I don't know how you're all seeing the screen, but I have John Laddersick, pronouns he, him on my left. John is a lifelong runner and an ESOL teacher. His running journey began at age 8 to escape bullying in school, allowing him to gain the respect of his peers and teachers. From being an age group standout in track and field to Maryland High School state champion to an NCAA Division I runner and now a marathon champion, he now works to inspire others to take their own path in leading physically and emotionally fit lives. Working to transform the trauma of exclusion and bullying into something positive, John is an advocate for anti-bullying through various health and wellness initiatives. He focuses on these team building and self-esteem programs to help children who feel marginalized find their niche and a sense of community. He combines his love of teaching and running by participating in several national teachers' teams for world marathon majors, like the Boston Marathon with the Highlands Teachers Team and the TCS New York City Marathon with Team TCS Teachers. He was twice selected as a wellness champion by his school district, and his story was recently featured in Runner's World magazine. Join me in welcoming John. Welcome, John. Next, we have Theresa. Theresa, hi. Hi, John. Next, we have Theresa Heiss, pronouns she, her. Theresa is a Northeast Ohio native, graduate from the University of Arkansas, member of the Golden Coast Track Club from 2018 to 2020. Theresa was an assistant coach at the University of Toledo and is now an assistant coach at Loyola University Chicago. She chose to pursue coaching so she can be a mentor who shows acceptance, allyship, and offer community to all. Her experiences have provided her with lessons and tools she hopes to extend to the next generation of student athletes to help them feel seen, heard, and most importantly, push them to offer that same thing to others. I hear you, Theresa. I always say myself, each one teach one. Let's welcome Theresa.
Thank you.
All right. Last but not least, we have Lauren, Lube, and April, pronouns they, them. Lauren is a non-binary athlete and activist who has been at the forefront of non-binary and transgender advancements in sports and health, academia, film and media, public policy, and more for over a decade. In 2015, Lauren founded New York City's first non-binary running group dedicated to meeting the specific needs of non-binary athletes and providing a space to participate, and launched the We Run campaign, which advocated for equal space and recognition for non-binary athletes in sports and gained national headlines. But it doesn't end there. In 2016, Lauren became the first ever openly non-binary runner to compete in the New York City Marathon and repeated history in 2019 at the Boston Marathon. Lauren is the executive producer of We Exist Beyond the Binary, an award-winning documentary that has been part of the curriculum of over 50,000 students in more than 70 countries and is the first full-length feature to explore the life of individuals who exist outside of the gender binary. Most recently, Lauren founded April House, a consulting company that specializes in building innovative, integrative, and sustainable sports systems beyond the gender binary. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you.
All right. Wow. We are in for an amazing conversation today, folks. If you have just joined, will be discussing their experiences with the impact and benefits that running and the running community can have on LGBTQIA+ runners' mental health. Again, if you have questions, you can add them at the bottom throughout the chat, throughout the session. And you will also have the opportunity at the end before we wrap up. Now, let's dive in. All right. So running. Running fuels someone's wellness. Running provides community. Running can be therapeutic. Running certainly brings joy and so much more. But for each of you, running may have a different meaning based on your lived experiences. So I will put this question out there for all of you on the panel. What has running meant to you in your lives? So I don't know who would like to go first.
Okay.
Not all at once now.
I'll go first. I'm gonna give a different take on this because we can talk about the mental health benefits that running in sports give us from our day-to-day lives, which are many. I will say for myself, I'm a lifelong athlete. Running was my second sport. And I came into running more as an adult, but I took many years away from sport. And part of that was throughout my career, being a non-binary person and really reconciling with my identity, I was forced out of sport a lot of ways due to discrimination and safety issues. And I kind of closed that chapter in my life after my collegiate career. I was like, I'm done with sports. I'm done with being an athlete. And there was a very big shift the first time I was given my first pair of running shoes. 1 mile turned into 2 miles, 2 miles, 3, 3, 4, 5, 6. And suddenly that sense of self came back. And when we talk about identity, one of the first identities I ever formed within myself, which was probably the most cohesive identity I ever had, was I'm an athlete. And I think I was about 5 years old when I recognized that this is who I was. And so for me, the role in which running has played in my life throughout the course of my adult life is it brought me back to myself, especially to an identity that became so difficult to me. But it also helped me really reclaim who I was as a person, reclaim parts of myself that perhaps I shut myself off to, and then empowered me. And I think from here on, running has really empowered me to not only set goals, to, be this athlete, but to be proud and carve a path forward for so many people like myself to occupy space and claim who they are. So for me, it's really been a journey of self-reclamation.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Theresa?
I'll go ahead and jump in. I know for me, running has been really the one constant aspect of my life. And I remember being discovered as a runner through playing soccer and out racing the coach after practice in the sprints and realizing that I had a real knack for this sport. I had a real talent. And I remember sometimes I would get in trouble on purpose, so I would have to run laps because running was just so therapeutic and so freeing for me. And I still look at it to this day as this quiet solitude and a little bit of meditation and just me time to really think about my day and the highs and the lows and really just to forget about my troubles. And going from an 8-year-old in youth track to running in high school and winning state championships and getting to run at the NCAA Division I level, and then still continuing that love as an adult. It's just, again, that constant thing that's always been with me and has really become a big part of my identity. And as I see it, a true gift that I have. And I know a little bit later we're going to get to talk about my experiences being bullied and really how running was that avenue to escape all of that trauma and to really find a safe haven in a sport that I've ultimately found acceptance in.
Thank you so much for sharing. Theresa?
All right. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Oh, good, good. Just checking. I was worried. I see so many parallels in my journey with running, as both Lauren and John just shared, which is one of the things that I think is so incredible about running is that it brings people together to share these moments that you may have initially not realized that you would have shared, these journeys, these paths. I've experienced heartbreak and also like the most fulfilling moments in my life because of this sport. And it definitely means so much to me that it's helped me grow into the person that I am and into the position that I'm in today. And I'm really excited about where I am and thankful for the sport for that. And I'm thankful, to be here today talking about the LGBTQ plus community and then also mental health in sport and how important those things are. So that's it.
Thank you for sharing. As Lauren, you mentioned the mental health struggles, and how within the spaces you felt isolated. These mental health struggles can definitely make you feel alone and further contribute to social isolation. John, I know you mentioned also that it was therapeutic for you, right? And Theresa, you mentioned the sense of community that's needed. So what role do you think running and being a part of the running community has on a runner's mental health? Lauren, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Joining the running community, I will say, is one of the things that that made me fall in love with running because of the sense of community, especially when you run alongside distance runners. You realize very quickly that everybody is running for something that is larger than themselves. And that is something that was very moving for me and something that I very much yearned for, as you said, Jenna, especially when you are part of a community that is either marginalized or discriminated. There is a sense of isolation. It's only as recently being a non-binary person where I can say words and use pronouns and people understand them, and I'm not just educating people on something that's so foreign, and I have more places to occupy. So, the actual experience of trying to navigate through a world can be very difficult and isolating. So having that sense of community, but not only a community where you have common interests, but that there's a deeper bond that we're all here for something that is very meaningful for us, and that is something that we can all share and understand about each other, creates something that's very unique and special to this sport. And I found that when I founded the New York City's first non-binary running club back in 2015, 14-ish, having that sense of just showing up one day a week to be with your people. We were of all different running experiences and levels. It really didn't matter. It was about being there with people that you can identify with, feel safe with, recognize yourself in. And I just saw so many people blossom from who they were as a person by being surrounded with a community that they belong to. And I would say, being an athlete, for my whole life, the running community is the most unique in the sense of, I would say, being so welcoming to people of various identities and backgrounds and abilities.
And I think that's really important what you spoke about, not just having the space, but having understanding in the space, having safety in the space, and having a sense of belonging in that space as well, as that space is forming to be more equitable along the way. What about you, Theresa?
Yeah, I would definitely echo a few of those like statements. I literally have written down like for this point, like safe space. I think the running community and running itself provides this meditative place that you can go, whether it's on your own or if you have that local community, that place that you like to go and you feel safe, especially if it's um, been labeled as like this specific group where you know that it's drawing people like you and you can just go there and be as you are, and maybe for the first time feel free to talk about things that you haven't been able to before. I think that's like a huge role that running and the running community will play for uh, mental health in runners.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point that you brought up, because people, when you show up into this space, you want to just be, right? You're coming to run, you want to be you. What about you, John?
So I've kind of taken an unconventional route to finding my running community, my running niche. I know when I started running, it was really to escape a lot of trauma with bullying. And I remember when I was little, I would run and I would try to go past each stoplight, each street light, and I would pretend it was one of my childhood bullies. And every time I would go past it, it was like to escape this imaginary physical abuse or this taunt or slur being hurled at me. And growing up as kind of that target and hearing a lot of anti-gay slurs hurled at me starting in kindergarten, I didn't always have the support with youth track. And I know for a lot of boys it may be similar. And I was afraid to use the bathroom because I was afraid I would be teased or physically hurt, or I was told no one wanted to touch the baton that I had in the relay because my gay hands touched it. But I used all of that negative energy to kind of fuel my fire to really have kind of this quiet redemption, and that I wanted to prove everyone wrong and break stereotypes in our community to show that we can be successful runners, and we had a sense of belonging. And years had passed that a lot of that bullying happened. And through my running success, I had a lot of people reach out to me that bullied me. And, 30 years later, were able to apologize and say, I was wrong about what I said, or I didn't have the words, or I wasn't educated about it. And hearing that in the most sincerest form decades later really just showed me how much those people truly regret what they did, but have progressed and learned. And so in my late 30s, I had, again, taken this unconventional route to sign up for a teacher contest with Highlands, who was sponsoring the Boston Marathon back in 2018. And part of that interview process, you share your story, you share your running accolades. And I kind of discovered in that what made me unique and special as a runner is overcoming a lot of trauma and using that as motivation to become a successful athlete. And on that running team, a lot of our teachers, have overcome a disability, or they've overcome illness, or they've had a weight loss journey, or they've started up a running club. And we just found each other as teachers to connect and really inspire each other with compassion for our students and a love of health and wellness. And those teachers really became my first friends as an adult, that I felt like I had a place. And running away from being labeled as gay to being embraced as it and being an inspiration because of it and being proud of it is really what set me free and got me to be so much more social and involved because of that love and support of that first teacher team. And then, as luck would have it, in 2020, I joined the TCS New York City Marathon team with its all teacher team. And once again, I just found the most supportive group. I call it a crazy kind of person, that you're a teacher and a runner, and we all have each other's back and we're there for each other. And it's just a beautiful thing. So it's taken me a long time to get there, but I feel like I'm finally embraced and accepted for who I am.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think I love that merger of teacher and runner, right? There's no other passionate groups there. So Theresa, I'm going to go to you now. You've mentioned, and John, you've also mentioned this, and also Lauren, how meditative running can be. I'm going to jump into some statistics about mental health in the LGBTQIA plus community. So according to Mental Health America, of those in the LGBTQIA plus community in America, 39% have reported having mental health challenges in the last year. That is nearly 5.8 million people, more than the entire population of Kentucky. And the operative word here is reported. Many others struggle in silence, as we know. It would also be remiss of me not to highlight the intersectionality of BIPOC and LGBTQIA plus folks and the compounded racism, stigma, disparities, and inequities they face. So, Theresa, you once said in a podcast interview, it's impossible to run freely, happily, wholeheartedly if you are feeling like you are constricted in other ways of your life. And that's absolutely true. What do you think are the most important things for runners to keep in mind when thinking about their mental health and ways to improve and preserve it?
Whew, forgot I said that. I like to say to always start by checking in on yourself. Find your why, and your why should be based around you may be looking for a way to have this sport become therapeutic, but it's very important to navigate yourself through joy in that. The reason I say this is running pulls a lot from your breath. And I know that a lot of times breathing can be a triggering instance for someone to kind of fall into feeling anxious or a stressor when you lose that breath. So it's always super important to find your why and find that goal. Like, why are you stepping out the door to go for this run? Why have you chosen to sign up for your first 5K or your first group run? And then additionally, after that, pace yourself in building those goals. Pace yourself en route to them. And along the way, always check back in and make sure that those goals continue to align with the person that you're growing and becoming. I think that we should always remember that we're human and that we change, and that's okay. And to make sure that the things that we're working for in the day-to-day are still the things that we want, a month from now, 5 years from now, and so on. So my biggest advice, I guess, would be to check in with yourself, to be patient and gracious with yourself, and make choices that you believe will bring you joy. Make choices surrounded by joy. Surround yourself with people that bring you joy. And I think that that's really what it's all about. Is surrounding yourself in a place with community for joy and working towards things that you believe will bring you that joy along the way.
Thank you for sharing. When you mentioned breathing, I remember recently, in the heart of everything that's going on in society, what we noticed, we did a meditation for our staff members. And what was one of parts of the meditation was understanding during these times, we actually hold our breath during trauma. So even if you're running, you're not breathing the way that you're supposed to, right? So thinking through every single aspect, as you mentioned, John, for health and wellness, every single aspect of it, all the different facets of wellness, I think it's important for us to breathe through these moments. And as you said, Theresa, checking in with ourselves, because oftentimes where, especially for empathetic people, you check in with others first, right? We do need to check in with ourselves before checking in with others. We can't fill other cups if ours are not filled, right? So we definitely, I think that's a really important piece that you mentioned, Theresa. So John, I'm going to go to you. Like many youths in the LGBTQIA plus community, you had lots of dark moments, as you've mentioned, as it relates to bullying, as it relates to conversion therapy that I've seen, in the Runner's World article. Younger members, as we know, of the LGBTQIA plus community struggle the most with mental health concerns of all age groups. Transgender and BIPOC LGBTQIA plus youth face further disparities. You said in the same Runner's World article, through it all, I kept running. It's always been a way to get away and feel free. In your work as an educator, John, what do you think are the priorities when encouraging young runners, and specifically young LGBTQIA plus runners?
So I wanted to turn a lot of my negative experience in school into something positive. I didn't necessarily have the best role models for teachers, and I wanted to become that positive role model myself. So I wanted to be proactive and preventative from having any youth experiencing a lot of the trauma that I did in the school setting. So while it may be scary to be the first, I wanted students to have accessible, visible LGBTQ role models. And um, I've been lucky enough to have some great principals to work for, because I do believe that any advocacy begins with your administrator in your building. And thankfully for me, my latest administrator actually went to college with me and knows me as a college athlete. And our namesake of our school, Sally Ride, was being honored this year as part of the U.S. Mint's American Women Quarters program. And many people don't know that Sally actually came out in her obituary out of fear through all of her space endeavors that she was going to be outed and have a negative experience. So we partnered with the US Mint to actually launch the Sally Ride Quarter this year. And in doing so, we got to collaborate with Sally's life partner, Tam O'Shaughnessy, and the Smithsonian and Out Astronaut to really bring to life that aspect of Sally's life, but also recognize her place in American history. I've also had the green light before in school to make an anti-bullying assembly centered around my own personal narrative biography, where we had this wonderful, beautiful town hall where students were able to role play and to define bullying and really have an open forum for what's troubling students and how they want to interact with each other, how they want to reach out and have friends or report what's happening in schools. And so in sharing my personal story, I was able to connect with a lot of students and also have other staff members share experiences that they were bullied for and how they overcame it, for students to see that this is something we can overcome in having role models and having strength and a safe place to go to. I also started a running chapter at one of my schools that was geared towards debunking myths of masculinity in boys. And in this program, we were able to start each session with the boys writing positive affirmations to each other. And for boys to do that, sometimes it's kind of awkward and something they're not used to, but to give a compliment or praise one of the boys for a running goal that was achieved or a job well done in the classroom was really neat for them to hear that positivity and to really speak with kindness and become empathetic. And in this program, we really showed that running is for everybody. If you're big, if you're small, if English isn't your first language, we all had a common running goal to work together. And in doing a lot of social emotional lessons with them and surrounding the running movement and the physicality of it, I feel like a lot of my missions in life of making running a safe haven, a safe space, I was able to do with this group of boys, and to really see them cheer each other on and work from, never exercising to completing their 5K was something really neat to see. And for me to walk away from that moment knowing how traumatic my early running years were with trying to fit in and be accepted, to know as the adult leader in that group that those boys had a visible role model and that they had a safe space to go to no matter what their issue was in school. They've made lifelong friends and they have a lifelong mentor in me.
I think that is absolutely incredible, John. Just thinking through positive affirmations that you were talking about, the role play that's done, seeing it and speaking it, I think is a really important thing. Growing up, I would always hear, and I don't know who made this saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Wrong, because words are very painful. Words can absolutely hit you like a dagger. And so I think it's really important in the work that you're doing through mentorship, through education, through walking them through every single piece of it, that there's words of affirmation and positive affirmations to each other. So really, really important what you're doing there, John. Thank you so much for sharing. Lauren, a couple of weeks ago, an article was published on Sport Litigation Alert where you were interviewed. You were asked, why does this sort of attention to creating an inclusive environment for non-binary athletes matter in the sports industry? And what stood out for me is when you said, it matters because we matter. Put simply, we exist and exclusion is no longer the solution. So as a non-binary athlete and activist, what do you feel are the most important needs to help foster an equitable and inclusive running community? And what issues do you currently see that can directly affect the LGBTQIA plus runners' mental health?
Yeah, great questions and big questions. I'm going to answer it actually backwards. Right now, sports have been used as a political wedge, as we have been seeing in the socio-political discourse, and it's hard to separate from that any further. And we see every day new bills being passed or new bills being proposed that really target the non-binary and transgender community, particularly as it relates to sports. And just even this past year, over 250 bills are targeted at the LGBTQ IA plus community. The majority of them being targeted to trans and non-binary youth and people at large, and even families. What I'm trying to get here at is there is a lot of intense focus and political pressure that has been applied to the community, often the most vulnerable populations, which are our trans and non-binary youth. And the mental health component of that is very critical and very real. Sports are one of those areas that, we like to say sports are for all, but in the reality of it, sports have not been designed for all. And we've been trying to champion inclusion and equity for so many different communities over, decades and decades. I think we've come a long way, but we're really now at a critical time when the binary sports model, and I think the way in which we are looking at how sports have been organized, are really coming into question. And more importantly, the political pressure and focus that has been put on sports and on certain communities has really had a profound impact on mental health. So with that being said, I think sports are, as we've talked about, as John has talked about, is the true benefits that sports have for our mental health are enormous. And I think it's about preserving, providing safety for people to be able to occupy sports, for all to be able to occupy sports, and really be able to participate in sport. And that starts with recognizing that, yes, everybody does deserve a right to play, but is everybody able to have equal access and opportunity in order to play, in order to run, in order to participate? And if not, then what can we do in order to ensure that? And that's kind of the crossroads that we're sitting in right now. And especially for, I'll just use the word gender diverse athletes, gender diverse youth who are trying to enter sports, enter an arena that just wasn't designed for them, and is trying to catch up. I think the first thing is create a safe space, recognize that safety is probably one of the first and most important parts of intervention, recognizing how volatile the socio-political climate is and all the added pressure that is placed on the person because of that. And then I'd say the second most immediate step is to build pathways for equal access and opportunity to sport. And running is one of those sports comparatively, when you are to look at other sports, where the entry and access point, I would say, is more accessible than other sports. So, there's a lot of work to be done, Jenna. I'll just throw it out there. I've had the pleasure of working with New York Roadrunners, and I'm really building out innovative and inclusive guidelines for non-binary runners. And hopefully, there's been a huge trend because of the leadership that New York Roadrunners has taken, where I've seen the running world really follow in really progressive waves of helping drive this next level of inclusion. And ultimately, as you said, where anybody can just show up and not have to worry about their person. They can show up and just run the best race they can.
That's right. Just show up and be. And what you mentioned before in terms of sociopolitical, everything that's happening right now has such a huge domino effect. And I think oftentimes people don't necessarily see or know or understand, or unfortunately, maybe in a space of a different part of the learning curve. And it has a domino effect for all ages. And we have to keep going back, John, to the folks that you work with, right? The youth, the LGBTQIA plus youth have way more and further disparities, more stigmas, more mental health conditions that arise because of it, because they're in that space of growing up, becoming who they are, right? They're becoming and growing into the space of becoming older, becoming an adult, right? Whether it's part of their tweens or teenagers. And I think it's a really important space and work that you're doing, John, in that foundational space. And Lauren, yes, creating these spaces that are inclusive, that are equitable, looking at the first part of it of being safety, because we all want to be safe. We all need to be safe, right? And then also thinking about it, not just from access, but as the work that we're doing also, the further part of it, the evolution of the experience. So not just you're welcoming into this space, we're creating an equitable space for you to come here, but what does your experience look like from start through finish and beyond? So really, really important work that we're doing there, Lauren, and thank you so much for bringing that up, and really, really glad that you are part of our partnership and our team. All right, so this is the last question that I have for every one of you. During the pandemic, and we are still here, we saw so many conversations move towards centering equity. And Laura, you just brought that up in the work that we're doing as well, and discussing the importance of mental health. There was also an increase in the numbers of LGBTQIA plus representation doing the sport we love, running. What can you share about what you have observed about this growth in the LGBTQIA plus running community? John, how about we kick it off with you?
Sure. So I remember that when the pandemic began, I was at school at Run Club handing out little bracelets as the kids did laps around the blacktop. And we received a message saying that we were going home from school and grab everything you have. We don't know when we're coming back. And quickly my thought was, when am I going to run? The gyms start to close. And then I think, well, at least I still have running to go on. To, oh my gosh, the Boston Marathon is canceled. And now the race that I have a bib to on Friday is canceled on Saturday, and I have to cross state lines to race. To finally, I need to just think about my own mental health, my own safety, my own security, and running kind of took a place on the back burner for a while. But one benefit, if any, of the pandemic for me is that I got to do a lot of traveling to a lot of more rural areas, a lot of smaller races, a little bit more of conservative areas that I once was a little bit afraid to go to as an LGBTQ athlete, about feeling accepted in a new, smaller town. But to my surprise, I found that in winning a lot of these races, I was in the winner circle and people are talking to me, and instead of feeling backlash or who's this gay athlete coming to my small town and winning my trophy, it was an embracive environment where I was seen as a runner. And one cool thing that happened in doing this pandemic racing in the smaller towns was a lot of people have seen my story out there, and I had the runner-up come up to me after the race and say, thank you for all your advocacy. And I kind of did a double take, like, what are you talking about? How do you know who I am? I'm from Maryland. I'm not even from Pennsylvania. And he said, my sister would be very proud of you. And she's a lesbian and she appreciates the work you're doing with our youth. And to me, that meant so much more than winning the race or winning a prize. It was knowing that I impacted people in rural areas that I once was so afraid of going to, because I was taught for so long to conceal who I was, and that maybe you'd only be accepted in a big urban setting. So that was really neat. And also just to connect to a lot of people on social media and virtually have a lot of fun challenges as a team, and, doing these crazy running ideas that I wouldn't have done if Boston was still happening or New York was still happening. And having fun doing the 5Ks and doing smaller things, and getting to win a marathon was always a goal of mine, and finally being able to do that during the pandemic brought a little bit of light to a dark situation. But going back more to your question, I do feel like the LGBTQ community came out in droves to running because it was the one sport that you could participate in when so much of the world closed. And running for a lot of us is a community sport, and that's how we get a lot of our support and affirmation. But it can also be a solo, isolated sport for people who look at mental health as a time of meditation. So I saw a little bit of a mix of each, but I definitely use the pandemic as what it was to broaden my adventures in US travel in the US and doing some smaller races and meeting some new people.
That's incredible. Running has so many, it hits so many aspects of wellness. So social wellness, if there's some social interaction there as running with a community, whether with a group, a running group, or what have you. Running has the mental health wellness, supporting your mental health in different ways. We've talked about it being therapeutic and meditative, freeing, bringing tranquility on your run. We've talked about it obviously from a physical standpoint. We know there's some pain sometimes involved at a certain mile. We wouldn't call that mile during the marathon, but there is absolutely some joy in that physical aspect of it as you continue to achieve your goals and your dreams. So thank you so much for sharing that. What about you, Theresa?
I really enjoyed listening to that story from John about being that town in Pennsylvania. That's something that I think is, a shining light in everything that's happened in the past few years is having conversations with people I think that maybe we wouldn't have expected in the past, and finding yourselves in situations that you haven't been before. And maybe it's a little uncomfortable, but maybe it also opened your eyes to seeing things from another perspective and kind of finding empathy and, like having more patience and understanding for people who are living lives that maybe previously you didn't understand or didn't know more about. I really think that is something that's come from the past few years. And then additionally, I think just people slowing down and being a little more patient. Also, like what John said, putting running on the back burner and prioritizing himself and his safety. And I think that a lot of people had to kind of find their own journey with that, and the things that could kind of wait, and you didn't need to rush to figure out how you could continue this routine that you used to have before. And I actually believe that running became something for a lot of people when gyms were no longer available. It was kind of like, well, maybe I'll just invest in a pair of running shoes and try this out. And eventually maybe you happened upon a group that you felt safe running with through it all, masked or not. I think it's been a very interesting time. It's really cool to see the number of LGBTQIA plus people come and share their stories and be more open in this running community, and just like this swell of population. And it is brings me a lot of joy for sure.
Thank you for bringing that up, Theresa. When you mentioned the slowing down, I think oftentimes we forgot that part of 2020, right? That slowing down during the pandemic, but it definitely elevated other spaces, to your point, right? There was so much more space to do something else, whether it is focusing on your mental health, finding a different community if the other one didn't work for you, What about you, Lauren?
Yeah, it was maybe a little too slow at times, but that's just my personal opinion. could have gone for a little pick me up every now and then. No, but jokes aside, one of the storylines that people may or may not be aware of, again, come from the non-binary and transgender perspective, is that when the world did shut down, and people had some people had their own little home sanctuary and safety. There was a real opportunity for gender nonconforming people to actually have the freedom and safety to be themselves more or express themselves more. And there was this uptick in people, particularly on the youth, who felt like they had this safety of not having to negotiate their way through a world that was so binary or transphobic, to be themselves more, to have some more breathing room. And I found that this was, so relatable for myself, even as an adult. And I'll just say, share a quick story really quickly. But, over the course of, my career being on the forefront of this advocacy, people would say, well, what is your everyday, everyday like? And I'm like, well, most of it is from the moment I leave my New York City apartment. I'm in Chicago now, but I still pretend I'm in New York. I have to plan out every step of my day, from where I'm going to use a bathroom, if there's non-gender neutral bathrooms, if I'm not going to use the bathroom, what do I look like? I'm always trying to figure out how I'm going to navigate and negotiate my way through a binary world that doesn't allow many opportunities for myself, or people like myself, to occupy space. So when the pandemic hit, there was really more of an opportunity for people to more freely occupy spaces and more freely express and be themselves, even if it was in the comforts of their own home. And to Theresa's, point, and John's, where it really also, was a great opportunity for people to just pick up shoes and get outside and just be active, even if it was new to them, because there weren't really other opportunities to, participate or play sports. The through line there was that I found so many people writing me or reaching out saying, oh my gosh, I never thought I'd be a runner, but I just fell in love with running because there was an opening and an opportunity for them to get out there and try something. And so now I think we've really hit a point where, there is a groundswell of people who, have really gotten to a point where they're no longer wanting to be forced in the closet in order to participate, right? Or be sidelined in order to not participate, especially coming out of, this pandemic, or even we are still in it, where there has been more of, I would say, people who are saying, okay, this is who I am and this is what I love to do, and I deserve a right to be in it. And I think more broadly, what we have seen New York Roadrunners, again, leading the way with, adding a non-binary gender category. There are now, I think, over 1,500 races nationwide that at the very least offer non-binary registration and participation, and then more and more races that are starting to add other offerings such as prize money, awards, etc., to a whole new demographic of people who have always been there, but now are being recognized rightfully as who we are. So it's been, a huge turning point in so many ways.
Thank you so much for sharing. My mom always told me to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And so whether it is that you put yourself in the other person's shoes and think, would you feel safe in this moment? Can you simply use the bathroom as yourself? I mean, some of the things that I feel are just thinking through from an empathetic human space can really solve some of these issues. And I think some of the challenges and some of creating more access and equity and inclusivity in the spaces, creating a sense of belonging for everyone by just simply putting yourself in the other person's shoes. I took my kids the other day to a dinosaur exhibit, and I was thinking, if my kids identify as non-binary here, because it was bathroom breaks 10 million times. And here are the two bathrooms, and it says ladies and gentlemen, and that was it. And, putting yourself in that shoe thinking, well, then what would my kid use? So I just think some of these things are absolutely lower hanging fruits, Lauren, some of the work that we have done. And some of them are definitely deeper and longer conversations, but it can be done. And we need to start dismantling a lot of these barriers along the way, whether in scene form, incremental ways. I think there's a lot of work to be done, but we can do it together. So in the interest of time, I know it's 6:52 and our panel is coming to an end. I would love to see the questions come in. I know we had 2 questions so far. So I believe the questions are coming in at the bottom of the screen. Let me just give some time for them to come in. So while they're coming in, I wanted to ask around the room here, for you, what was the most interesting part of the conversation today? So Theresa, what about you? What stood out to you today during this panel?
It was really great to hear both from Lauren and John and hear about their experiences. I do think they are quite different from my own. So I really appreciated their vulnerability and sharing those and all the work they've been doing. That was definitely it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. What about you, John?
I just look at the word hope and hopeful, and just that listening to all of us on this panel and what the New York Roadrunners is doing and what Front Runners New York are doing with the Pride Run and how historical it is. I just see hope in the future of our youth all the way up to adults, and just having change and making the running community even more inclusive than it is now. I'm just really hopeful in where we're going with this.
Looking through a lens of hope. I love that. What about you, Lauren?
Yeah, I'd be remiss by saying, thank you again to front runners and, New York Roadrunners for being, I've run all the races, so this is, brings it all home. And, agreed, listening to people's stories and having these conversations is always the most rewarding part for me. I'm continually inspired by the running community always. I just feel like we might be a bunch of nuts, like overcommitting ourselves and reaching for the stars. And it's like in the best way possible, because I just, every time I hear somebody talk, I'm like, I feel like I need a nap by how much work people do in this space. And it's just, it's awesome. So thank you all for opening up and sharing these stories.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much. All right, so here is the question. JC Berg, is there any difference in performance after doing the same workout between 2 runners, one from the LGBTQIA plus community and one who's not part of the LGBTQIA plus community? I hope you guys understand my question. So anyone want to take that question?
I'm not sure if I actually do understand the question too much, so I don't want to misspeak, but I would say just in general, running from, and I'm not a coach like John, so John, feel free to correct me, but from running my clubs and being parts of various clubs of LGBTQ plus people to just allies, I haven't seen much of a performance difference when it comes to our workouts. I think it really just depends on how seasoned of a runner you are. And I know if I was to run with a group that was, far more seasoned and or advanced than I think that it would be a little bit different. But when it comes from like how people identify and who they are, I don't think that there's any clear through line between performance and identity.
Thank you, Lauren. All right, can we have the next question up? I can't see the full question. Let's see here. Sunflower lilies. So they said, why the new focus on making everyone aware that there are LGBTQIA plus member runners? As I run around 15,000 runners, I don't think I have ever given it a single thought that we have different sexual orientations as I run along my fellow runners. So I'm not sure of exactly the question. Maybe it's the, I don't know if the person, if you're asking about the focus on LGBTQIA plus equity, gender equity. I'm not sure if it's around equity and inclusion and belonging. Anyone want to take that question if that's the direction that they're going?
Yeah, I don't want to dominate here. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I look at the question is, why do people have to share their sexual orientation in the running community? But I think what we've heard from the panel and just the front runners in general and the running community in general, some people are afraid to come out, and in having, again, accessible role models or someone that they know is in the community as an ally for people that have experienced a lot of trauma in other running communities, I think it's helpful to know that there's an allyship or a camaraderie or a common bond, whether it's your sexuality or a common interest that you have. If it's, I'm on a teacher team and teaching is our main interest and commonality. But for some people I know that have felt exclusion and are looking for a community that embraces the part of them that has been, discriminated against or bullied or excluded. That's why I think a lot of us feel that that's a need, and some people are still afraid to do it. But I think the goal in having these discussions is that everyone is comfortable in their own skin, that one day we won't have to have that discussion. But right now, progress is being made, but it's not yet to the point where everyone is comfortable in their own skin with their sexual orientation.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm just going to say one thing about that, because it's right. I think it's a great question too. I think running is oftentimes perceived as a sport that is egalitarian, but the reality is there are so many different communities who don't have the same equity and or inclusion or belonging to the sport of running that, other communities do. And I think that is really why it's important to, have conversations, is to expand our narrative of what it is to be a runner, and what those experiences are, but then how we can improve upon a sport that so many of us are a part of, so that we have opportunity to really just excel as a runner. And, part of it has to do with, let's say LGBTQIA plus identities, but, other parts of there's so many different identities from, ethnic, racial, et cetera, where we can, when we elevate these voices, we really begin to recognize that, the sport is something that can be much more inclusive and equitable. So that's why these conversations are important. It's not about when we're running side by side shouting our identities and who we are from the rooftops, although I may have done that a few times. But it's more about recognizing that if there are areas in which people are starting from behind or aren't even included at all, then these are things that we need to talk about, because we all belong and we owe it to each other to do that work. And it only comes through storytelling and providing spaces like this to use our voice.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, John. I think it's a great question too. I think many folks think it but may not say it. And so this is the space to, pose that question. And so we can answer as a panel. One of the things too that I think about is when you show up as yourself, you show up as your whole self, right? So whatever that intersectionality is, you show up as your whole self. Some things are seen, some things are not seen. But at the same time, you want to be able to get into a space, as Lauren has mentioned many times before, getting to a space where it's safe, that is accessible, and that you feel that you belong. You feel that you don't even have to question that. And as we've talked about throughout the panel, you feel like you could show up as yourself, as your whole self, and just simply be and run. So thank you so much for posing that question. I know we are at time. So this was certainly an incredible and important conversation today. We thank each one of our panelists who shared their lived experience and provided their thoughts and advice. The LGBTQIA plus community is resilient, but as we just talked about, we must do our part as a wider community, centering equity in all spaces, increasing representation, safety, and belonging. There's a lot of work to be done. We did a lot of work, but there's definitely some more to be done. So we encourage you to find your running community if you haven't already, as they can be a source of strength, as we learned today. Finding your community can help with navigating through mental health challenges and elevate your running journey. As Theresa said, find your why. I love that. We thank you for being with us. We hope you found this discussion helpful and insightful and conversational, and we welcome you to share your thoughts in the thread. Have a wonderful evening and happy Pride Month.